I stood in the opulent office of Nathan Sterling, on the top floor of the Sterling Tech Tower, where the city sprawled beneath us like a glittering chessboard. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting sharp beams across the polished walnut desk, but it did nothing to warm the chill that hung in the air. The faint scent of polished wood and the distant clatter of keyboards from the open-plan office beyond the glass walls filled the space, but all I could feel was a suffocating weight pressing against my chest. Today, I, Evelyn Harper, would sign a contract to marry a man I barely knew, a man whose cold, piercing gaze could cut through steel. Nathan Sterling, tech billionaire, with a reputation as pristine as it was unyielding, sat across from me, his presence as imposing as the skyscraper. We stood in. I needed him. I needed this deal to save Harper Textiles, the last remnant of my father's legacy, a family business teetering on the edge of bankruptcy ever since I walked away 15 years ago. The bank had laughed in my face when I applied for a loan. Apparently, a single woman with a history of abandoning her responsibilities didn't qualify as stable enough for their standards. Nathan, on the other hand, needed a wife to polish his image, to quiet the whispers of his reckless private life that had begun to unsettle his shareholders. It was a perfect arrangement on paper, a marriage of convenience, a cold transaction, devoid of emotion. But as I stood there, my heart pounded like a war drum, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a trap of my own making. I adjusted the lapel of my navy blazer, the fabric smooth under my trembling fingers, trying to steady myself. My reflection in the glass behind Nathan caught my eye. Pale, sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that betrayed the storm raging inside me. I looked like a woman in control, but I felt like a fraud. Nathan sat back, in his leather chair, his black suit tailored to perfection, hugging his broad shoulders and lean frame. His gaze swept over me, not with curiosity or warmth, but with the clinical precision of a man assessing a balance sheet. "Do you understand the terms?" he asked, his voice low and devoid of inflection, each word as sharp as a blade. I nodded, my throat tight, but inside, I was drowning in a flood of memories. I saw my father's face, etched with desperation, the day I left. "Evelyn, the company is the heart of this family," he had pleaded, his voice cracking as he stood in the doorway of our old house in Boston. But I couldn't stay. Not after Mom's death, not after the suffocating grief that had swallowed me whole. I ran, chasing a career in fashion, chasing a life where I could bury the pain under layers of ambition and success. I built a name for myself in New York. But at what cost? Dad died 3 years ago, alone, and Harper Textiles began to crumble without him. Now I was the only one left to save it, to honor the promise I had broken so long ago. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. "I understand." Nathan slid the contract across the desk, the paper crisp and white, a stark contrast to the dark wood beneath it. I picked up the pen, its weight heavy in my hand, and hesitated. This was it, the moment I would trade my freedom for a chance at redemption. I scrawled my name on the dotted line, the scratch of the pen echoing in the silence. As I handed the pen to Nathan, our fingers brushed, and a jolt of electricity shot through me, sharp and unexpected. I pulled back, my breath catching, and, for a fleeting second, I saw something flicker in his eyes, something that wasn't cold or calculated, something almost human. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that impenetrable mask he wore so well. He signed his name with a swift, precise motion, then leaned back, his gaze locking onto mine. "It's done," he said, his tone as flat as the glass surface of the desk. "We'll announce the engagement tomorrow. The wedding will be in a week. A week. 7 days to prepare myself for a lie that would define the next 6 months of my life. I should have felt relief. The deal was sealed. Harper Textiles would have the financial backing it needed to survive. But instead, I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a gnawing fear that I was making a mistake I couldn't undo. Nathan's eyes held mine, deep and unreadable, like the ocean at midnight. There was something in his stare that made me uneasy, as if he could see through the walls I had spent years building around myself. I stood, smoothing my blazer again, a nervous habit I couldn't shake. "I'll see you at the announcement," I said, my voice clipped, eager to escape the suffocating tension of the room. Nathan didn't respond immediately. He watched me for a moment longer, his expression unreadable, then nodded. "Don't be late," he said, a faint edge to his voice that I couldn't quite place. I turned and walked toward the door, my heels clicking against the polished floor, each step echoing like a countdown. As I reached for the handle, I glanced back, unable to resist. Nathan was still watching me, his gaze intense, almost predatory. A shiver ran down my spine, and I quickly stepped out, the glass door closing behind me with a soft thud. The elevator ride down was a blur, the city skyline stretching out before me through the glass walls. But all I could see was my father's face, his words echoing in my mind. "The company is the heart of this family." I had failed him once, but I wouldn't fail him again. I would save Harper Textiles, no matter the cost. But as I stepped out into the bustling streets of New York, the weight of Nathan's gaze lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just signed away more than my freedom. I wondered if I could truly repair the past, or if I had already lost everything worth saving. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel shimmered with opulence, a glittering stage for the lie I was about to live. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the sea of white roses that adorned every table, their delicate scent mingling with the faint notes of champagne in the air. The soft strains of a string quartet played a classical melody, but the music did little to soothe the storm raging inside me. I stood at the center of it all, my white gown clinging to my frame like a second skin, its lace sleeves whispering against my arms with every movement. I should have felt like a bride, but I felt like a fraud. The cameras flashed relentlessly, their blinding lights searing into my eyes, capturing every moment of this hollow charade. Today, I, Evelyn Harper, would marry Nathan Sterling, not for love, but for survival. Nathan stood beside me, his presence as commanding as ever, his black tuxedo tailored to perfection. He didn't smile, didn't speak beyond the bare minimum required by the ceremony. His face was a mask of stoic indifference, his jaw set in a hard line, and I wondered if he felt as trapped as I did. The officiant, a gray-haired man with a gentle voice, spoke the traditional vows, his words echoing through the room like a distant hum. I barely heard them, my mind lost in a fog of guilt and regret. When the moment came to exchange rings, Nathan took my hand, his touch firm but impersonal. His fingers brushed against mine as he slid the platinum band onto my finger, and a jolt of warmth shot through me, unexpected and disorienting. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, and for a fleeting second I looked up at him. His eyes met mine, deep and unreadable, but there was something in his gaze, a flicker of something I couldn't name. "You look fine," he whispered, his voice low and detached, as if he were commenting on the weather. I dropped my gaze, my cheeks burning, unable to face the intensity of his stare. I didn't want him to see the cracks in my carefully constructed facade, the raw pain that threatened to spill over. The ceremony ended with a smattering of polite applause. The guests, mostly Nathan's business associates and a handful of press, raising their glasses in a toast to our union. I forced a smile, my lips trembling, and clung to Nathan's arm as we made our way through the crowd. The cameras followed us, their flashes relentless, each click a reminder of the lie we were selling to the world. I felt like a marionette, my strings pulled by forces I couldn't control, and Nathan was the puppeteer, guiding me through this performance with cold precision. After the reception, We left the hotel in a sleek black car, the city lights blurring past us as we drove. In silence, Nathan stared out the window, his profile sharp against the glow of the streetlights, and I sat with my hands clasped tightly in my lap, the weight of the ring on my finger a constant reminder of the deal I had made. We arrived at his penthouse, a sprawling space on the Upper East Side with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of New York's skyline. The living room was bathed in soft light from a modern chandelier, its sleek design a stark contrast to the warmth of the Four Seasons ballroom. The air smelled faintly of leather and citrus, a scent that was distinctly Nathan, and I felt like an intruder in his world. He showed me to a guest room down the hall, his movements brisk and efficient. "You'll stay here," he said, his tone clipped, as if he were giving instructions to an employee. I nodded, too exhausted to respond, and he turned to leave. But as he reached the door, he paused, his hand on the frame, and glanced back at me. "Get some rest," he added, his voice softer this time, almost human. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a quiet click. I stood in the middle of the room, the silence pressing in around me, and let my shoulders slump. The gown felt heavy now, its beauty a cruel mockery of the emptiness I felt inside. I slipped out of it, letting it pool on the floor like a discarded dream, and changed into a simple silk nightgown. My suitcase sat in the corner, and I knelt beside it, my fingers trembling as I unzipped the side pocket. Inside was a small, faded handkerchief, my father's, the last thing he had given me before I left. It still carried the faint scent of his cologne, a mix of cedar and tobacco, and I pressed it to my face, breathing in the memory of him. Tears welled in my eyes, spilling over as I clutched the fabric to my chest. "I'm so sorry, Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I should have stayed. I should have fought for you." I wondered if he could forgive me, if he was watching from somewhere beyond, disappointed in the daughter who had abandoned him when he needed her most. I crawled into the bed, the sheets cool against my skin, and curled into a ball, the handkerchief still in my hand. The city hummed outside, a distant lullaby, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind replayed the day, the cameras, Nathan's touch, the weight of the ring. And then I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps in the hall, slow and deliberate, as if someone were pacing. I held my breath, listening as the steps paused outside my door. It was Nathan. I knew it was him. My heart raced, a mix of fear and something I couldn't name. I waited, expecting a knock, but none came. After a long moment, the footsteps retreated, fading into the silence of the penthouse. I exhaled, my body trembling, and pulled the blanket tighter around me. Nathan's presence lingered, a shadow I couldn't escape, and I realized that this marriage, this deal, was more than a transaction. It was a test of my strength, my resolve, my ability to face the past I had run from for so long. I felt both relieved and achingly alone as I lay there, the city lights casting faint patterns on the ceiling. I had taken the first step to save Harper Textiles to honor my father's legacy, but at what cost? And as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan Sterling saw more of me than I wanted him to. And that scared me more than anything. The days that followed the wedding were a blur of silence and distance, a fragile truce between two strangers bound by a contract. Nathan and I lived like ghosts in his sprawling penthouse, our paths crossing only in fleeting moments, him leaving for the office at dawn, me retreating to the guest room with a laptop, poring over financial reports for Harper Textiles. The city hummed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a constant reminder of the world we were trying to fool. But inside these walls, the air was thick with unspoken tension. I threw myself into saving the company, reaching out to old suppliers, drafting proposals to secure new contracts, anything to keep my mind off the man I now called my husband. but Nathan was a shadow I couldn't escape, his presence lingering in every corner of this cold, modern space. The faint scent of his cologne in the hallway, the sound of his voice on conference calls echoing through the walls. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the skyline in shades of orange and gold, I found myself in Nathan's study, a room I had avoided until now. I needed a quiet place to work, away from the sterile guest room that felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. The study was a stark contrast to the rest of the penthouse. Dark wood shelves lined the walls, filled with books and awards, and a large mahogany desk sat in the center, its surface cluttered with papers and a sleek computer monitor. The air carried the faint smell of old paper and ink, a scent that reminded me of my father's office back in Boston, where I used to sit on his lap as a child, watching him sketch designs for new fabrics. I pushed the memory aside, my chest tightening, and sat at the desk, opening my laptop to continue my work. As I shifted a stack of papers to make room, a small envelope slipped out, yellowed with age, the edges frayed as if it had been handled too many times. My curiosity got the better of me, and I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I opened it. Inside was a letter, the handwriting feminine and delicate, the ink faded but still legible. "Nathan," it began, "our son needs you. Don't abandon him like you abandoned me. Clara." My breath caught in my throat, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. Nathan had a son, a child he had never mentioned, a secret buried in the folds of this fragile piece of paper. I read the letter again, my mind racing. Clara, whoever she was, had written this with a desperation that mirrored my own, a plea for a man who seemed incapable of warmth to step up and be a father. I don't know how long I sat there, the letter clutched in my hand, but the sound of the door opening snapped me out of my daze. Nathan stood in the doorway, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. His eyes narrowed as he saw me at his desk, the letter in my grip, and for a moment, I saw something dangerous flash across his face, anger, or perhaps fear. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low and controlled, but there was an edge to it, sharp enough to cut. I stood, my heart pounding, and held up the letter, my voice trembling but firm. "Who is he, Nathan? Your son. Who is he?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and charged. Nathan's jaw tightened, and he set the glass down on a nearby shelf with a deliberate slowness that made my skin prickle. He stepped closer, his presence filling the room, the air growing colder with every inch he closed between us. I could feel the heat of his breath, the faint scent of whiskey mingling with his cologne, and I fought the urge to step back. "His name is Ethan," Nathan said finally, his voice low and raw, as if the words were being torn from him. "I didn't know he existed until Clara died. She was someone from my past. I looked for him after she was gone, but I couldn't face him. I couldn't face what I'd done." His eyes met mine, and for the first time since we met, I saw something break in them. A crack in the armor he wore so well, revealing a man haunted by his own failures. I felt a pang of sympathy, my hand instinctively reaching out to rest on his shoulder, the fabric of his shirt warm under my fingers. "You can't run from him forever," I said softly, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. But even as I spoke, I felt a wave of hypocrisy wash over me. I was running too, wasn't I? Running from the guilt of abandoning my father, from the weight of his legacy, from the pain I had buried deep inside. Nathan's gaze softened, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made my heart race. "You're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you're running too, aren't you, Evelyn?" His words were a dagger, slicing through the walls I had built around myself, exposing the raw, bleeding truth I had tried so hard to hide. I pulled my hand back, my breath hitching, and turned away, unable to meet his gaze. He saw me, really saw me, and that terrified me more than anything. I wanted to be free, to escape the chains of my past, but I was tethered to it, just as Nathan was tethered to his. I left the study without another word, the letter still in my hand, its weight heavier than ever. As I closed the door behind me, I leaned against the wall, my chest heaving, tears burning in my eyes. Nathan's words echoed in my mind, a cruel mirror reflecting my own failures. I had come back to save Harper Textiles, to honor my father's memory, but I was still running from the woman I had become. And Nathan, he was a mirror too, a man as broken as I was, hiding behind a facade of control. I felt a strange connection to him in that moment, a thread of understanding that both comforted and frightened me. We were two lost souls, bound by a lie. But maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to face our shadows together. The illusion of our marriage shattered like glass under the harsh glare of the media, and I felt the shards cutting into me with every headline that screamed across the internet. It started with a single article, published by a tabloid known for its ruthless exposés, but it spread like wildfire, igniting a storm of scrutiny that neither Nathan nor I could escape. The headline was seared into my mind. Billionaire Nathan, Sterling's sham marriage, a financial fraud. The words were a dagger, twisting deeper with every cruel comment that followed. Gold digger, they called me, a desperate woman clinging to a rich man's coattails. The accusations stung, each one a reminder of the failures I had tried so hard to bury. The daughter who abandoned her father, the woman who ran from her past, now painted as a schemer in a game I hadn't even wanted to play. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room of Nathan's penthouse, my laptop open on my lap, the screen glowing with the latest barrage of articles. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the comments, each one more vicious than the last. She's using him to save her failing company, one read. Sterling deserves better than a fraud like her, another sneered. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest tight, the air in the room suddenly too thin to breathe. I had known this marriage would come with challenges, but I hadn't anticipated the sheer weight of public judgment, the way it would strip me bare and expose every insecurity I had fought to hide. I felt like I was drowning, the waves of criticism pulling me under, and all I could think about was my father. How disappointed he would be to see his legacy dragged through the mud because of me. Nathan, as always, seemed unshaken. He stood in the living room, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, measured tones to his PR team. I watched him through the open door, his broad shoulders squared, his expression as unreadable as ever. "We'll handle it," he said, his voice steady, but I caught the flicker of exhaustion in his eyes, the faint lines of tension around his mouth. He hung up and turned to me, his gaze locking onto mine with that unnerving intensity that always made my heart race. "We'll get through this," he said, his tone firm, as if he could will the storm away with sheer determination. But I saw the weariness in him, the toll this was taking, and it only deepened the guilt that gnawed at my insides. This was my fault. I had dragged him into this mess, and now we were both paying the price. "I can't do this," I whispered, my voice breaking as I stood, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I can't keep pretending, Nathan. Not when it's destroying everything." My words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of my shame. I couldn't bear the thought of staying, of facing another day under the microscope of public scorn. I had to leave, to escape the suffocating pressure before it crushed me completely. I turned and fled to the guest room, my movements frantic as I grabbed a pen and a piece of paper from the nightstand. My hands shook as I scrawled a note, the words spilling out in a rush of emotion. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. Thank you for everything." I left the note on the bed, grabbed my suitcase, and slipped out of the penthouse before Nathan could stop me, the door closing behind me with a soft thud that felt like the end of something I couldn't name. I returned to my small apartment in Brooklyn, a modest space I hadn't set foot in since the wedding. The air smelled of stale coffee and dust, the hum of traffic outside a stark contrast to the sterile silence of Nathan's penthouse. I dropped my suitcase by the door and sank onto the worn couch, my body trembling as the weight of the past few weeks crashed over me. I thought I could handle this. Handle him, handle the deal, handle the world watching our every move. But I was wrong. I was breaking piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop it. I buried my face in my hands, tears streaming down my cheeks, the ache in my chest growing with every sob. I missed Nathan. His steady presence, the way his gaze made me feel seen, even when I didn't want to be. But I couldn't go back, not when I was the reason for his downfall. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me out of my thoughts, the sound cutting through the silence like a knife. I glanced at the screen, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the decline button, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse from crying. "Evelyn, it's Margaret." The voice on the other end was achingly familiar, and my heart stopped. Margaret, my older sister, the one I hadn't spoken to since I left Boston 15 years ago, the one I had abandoned along with our father. Her words came in a rush, laced with a desperation that mirrored my own. "I found Ethan, Nathan's son. He's been living with me for the past year, but I can't do this alone anymore. I need your help." I froze, the phone slipping slightly in my grip as her words sank in. Ethan, Nathan's son, the boy he had spoken of in the study, the secret that had cracked open the walls between us. My mind raced, a flood of emotions crashing over me. Shock, guilt, and a flicker of hope I didn't dare name. I thought of Nathan, of the pain in his eyes when he spoke of Ethan, of the way he had run from his own past just as I had run from mine. And I thought of Margaret, the sister I had left behind, now reaching out to me in a moment of need. "I'm coming," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. I hung up, my tears still wet on my cheeks, and clutched the phone to my chest. I had run from my family once, but I wouldn't do it again. Not from Margaret, not from Ethan, and not from the promise I had made to my father. But as I sat there, the city buzzing outside my window, I couldn't shake the image of Nathan's face, the sound of his voice telling me we'd get through this. I had left him behind, but a part of me, a part I was too afraid to acknowledge, wanted to go back. The rain fell in relentless sheets as I drove through the outskirts of Boston, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I navigated the narrow streets toward the address Margaret had given me. Her words from the phone call echoed in my mind, a haunting refrain that drowned out the rhythmic thud of the wipers. "I've found Ethan, Nathan's son. He's been living with me, but I can't do this alone anymore." I hadn't seen my sister in 15 years, not since I left her and Dad to chase a life free of the grief that had consumed me after Mom's death. Now, I was returning, not just to Margaret, but to a piece of Nathan's past that I had stumbled upon in that faded letter, a piece that could either break us further or stitch us back together. I pulled up to a modest apartment building, its brick facade weathered and streaked with rain. The street lamp cast a dim glow over the entrance, illuminating the cracked steps that led to Margaret's door. I parked the car and sat there for a moment, the engine idling, my breath fogging the window. I was terrified, not just of facing Margaret, but of meeting Ethan, the boy who carried Nathan's blood, the boy Nathan had run from just as I had run from my own family. I forced myself out of the car, the rain soaking through my coat as I hurried up the steps and knocked on the door. Margaret opened it almost immediately, her face a mirror of the girl I remembered but etched with lines of exhaustion and worry. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes, those same hazel eyes we shared, were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying. "Evelyn," she whispered, her voice breaking. And before I could say a word, she pulled me into a fierce hug. I clung to her, the years of distance melting away in the warmth of her embrace, and I felt tears sting my eyes. "I'm so sorry," I choked out, my voice muffled against her shoulder. "I should have been here. I should have never left you." She pulled back, her hands on my shoulders, and gave me a small, sad smile. "You're here now," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "That's what matters." She stepped aside, ushering me into the small apartment. The living room was cluttered but cozy, with a worn couch, a coffee table covered in crayons and coloring books, and a faint smell of baked bread lingering in the air. A boy sat on the floor, his back to us, his dark hair tousled as he focused on a drawing. "Ethan," Margaret called softly, and he turned, his eyes meeting mine. My breath caught in my throat. He had Nathan's eyes, those same deep, stormy gray eyes that had haunted me since the day we met. Ethan was 10 years old, small for his age, with a quiet intensity that reminded me so much of his father. "This is Evelyn," Margaret said, her voice gentle. "She's a friend." Ethan studied me for a moment, then asked in a small voice, "Are you here to take me to my dad?" The question pierced me like a knife, and I knelt down in front of him, my heart aching. "I'm here to help," I said, my voice trembling. "And I promise, I'll do everything I can to make sure you're safe." He nodded, his expression guarded, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes that gave me the strength to keep going. Margaret and I sat at the kitchen table while Ethan returned to his drawing, the rain drumming against the windows in a steady rhythm. She told me everything, how she had found Ethan through a social worker after Clara, his mother, passed away from cancer 2 years ago. Clara had left a letter for Margaret, asking her to look after Ethan if anything happened to her, knowing Margaret's connection to Nathan through me. "I've been trying to manage," Margaret said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "But I'm a single mom, Evelyn. I have my own daughter to take care of, and Ethan, he needs his father." I nodded, my mind racing. Nathan needed to know, needed to face this part of his past, but I wasn't sure if I could be the one to bring him here, not after I had walked away. That night, as I sat on Margaret's couch, the rain still falling outside, I heard a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat, a mix of fear and anticipation coursing through me. Margaret glanced at me, her brow furrowing, and went to answer it. When she opened the door, there he was. Nathan, his black suit soaked through, rain dripping from his hair, his face a mask of anguish. "Evelyn," he said, his voice raw, and the sound of my name on his lips sent a shiver down my spine. He stepped inside, his eyes searching mine, and I stood, my hands trembling at my sides. "Why did you leave?" he asked, his voice breaking, the pain in his words cutting me deeper than any blade. I turned away, unable to meet his gaze, my tears threatening to spill over. "Because I didn't want to hurt you anymore," I said, my voice shaking. All of this, it's my fault." Nathan closed the distance between us in 2 strides, his hands gripping my arms as he pulled me into his embrace. The warmth of his body against mine was a stark contrast to the cold rain clinging to his clothes, and I felt my resolve crumble. "You didn't hurt me," he said, his voice low and fierce. "Losing you, that's what hurt me." I looked up at him, his gray eyes stormy with emotion, and my heart ached at the vulnerability I saw there. "I did something for you," he said, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. "I invested in Harper Textiles before you left. I didn't do it to save my image. I did it because I wanted to protect your father's legacy. Because I love you, Evelyn." The words hit me like a tidal wave, and I gasped, my tears spilling over. He loved me. Nathan Sterling, the man I thought was incapable of feeling, loved me. The rain continued to fall outside, the sound of it mingling with the distant hum of the city, and I felt the weight of the past lift, just a little. "I love you too," I whispered, my voice barely audible. But the words were a lifeline, pulling us both from the darkness. In that moment, with Nathan's arms around me and Ethan just a few feet away, I knew we had a chance. Not just to save Harper Textiles, but to build something real, something worth fighting for. The fragile peace Nathan and I had found in that rain-soaked apartment felt like a fleeting dream, a moment of clarity before the storm returned with a vengeance. We had confessed our love, a raw and unexpected truth that bound us together in a way our contract never could. But the world outside Margaret's small haven was not so forgiving. The media storm had quieted, but the whispers of our sham marriage still lingered, and I knew that our newfound connection would be tested, perhaps sooner than either of us was ready for. I spent the next few days with Margaret and Ethan, helping her with the children, while Nathan returned to the city to manage the fallout at Sterling Tech. I watched Ethan draw pictures of a family he had never known, his small hands gripping, the crayons with a determination that broke my heart. And I vowed to bring Nathan back to him, to give this boy the father he deserved. But the past has a way of clawing its way back, and it came for us in the form of Victor Langston, a name I hadn't heard in years, but one that still sent a chill down my spine. Victor had been my father's rival in the textile industry, a ruthless businessman who had once tried to buy Harper Textiles out from under us, only to be outmaneuvered by Dad's ingenuity. I remembered the day Dad came home, his face alight with triumph, telling us how he had secured a deal that would keep the company in our family for generations. Victor had never forgiven that loss, and now, with Harper Textiles vulnerable and my marriage to Nathan under scrutiny, he saw his chance to strike. The confrontation came at a charity gala in Manhattan, a glittering affair hosted at the Plaza Hotel, where the city's elite gathered to sip champagne and flaunt their wealth under the guise of philanthropy. I stood beside Nathan, my arm linked through his, the emerald green gown I wore shimmering under the grand chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of orchids and the soft hum of a piano, its melody weaving through the murmur of conversation. I felt Nathan's warmth beside me, a steady anchor in the sea of unfamiliar faces, but my nerves were on edge. We had agreed to make a public appearance together, to show the world that our marriage was real, that the rumors were just that. Rumors. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something I wouldn't be prepared for. I saw Victor before he saw me, his tall frame cutting through the crowd like a shark through water. He was older now, his hair streaked with gray, but his eyes still held that predatory glint I remembered from my childhood. He wore a tailored, gray suit, a glass of red wine in his hand, and when his gaze landed on me, a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. My stomach twisted, and I tightened my grip on Nathan's arm, my nails digging into his sleeve. "Nathan," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the music. "He's here." Nathan followed my gaze, his jaw tightening as he recognized Victor. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice low and protective, and I nodded, my heart pounding. In my chest. Victor approached us, his stride deliberate, his smile never wavering. "Evelyn Harper," he said, his voice smooth as silk but laced with venom. Or should I say Mrs. Sterling? Quite the transformation for a woman who ran from her father's legacy. His words were a knife, slicing through the fragile confidence I had built, and I felt my cheeks burn with shame. Nathan stepped forward, his body a shield between me and Victor, his presence radiating quiet strength. "What do you want, Langston?" he asked, his tone cold, each word a warning. Victor's smile widened, his eyes glinting with malice. "I want what's owed to me," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Your little marriage might have fooled the press, but I know the truth. You're trying to take Harper Textiles for yourself, Sterling, and I won't let you. I've already planted the seeds, rumors that you've been siphoning funds, that this whole charade is a cover for a hostile takeover. The board will turn on you, and when they do, I'll be there to pick up the pieces." I felt the blood drain from my face, my knees trembling beneath the weight of his words. Victor wasn't just attacking Nathan. He was attacking my father's legacy, the one thing I had sworn to protect. I stepped out from behind Nathan, my voice shaking but resolute. "You're wrong," I said, my eyes locked on Victor's. "I ran from my father once, and I'll carry that shame for the rest of my life. But I won't let you destroy what he built. Harper Textiles belongs to my family, and I'll fight for it with everything I have." Victor laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the room, drawing curious glances from the other guests. "You're a fool, Evelyn," he sneered. "You don't deserve your father's legacy, not after you abandoned him." His words were a mirror, reflecting my deepest fears, and I felt them cut me to the core. But before I could respond, Nathan's hand found mine, his fingers wrapping around mine in a grip that was both firm and reassuring. "She's not alone," he said, his voice low and steady. But there was a fire in his eyes that made Victor's smile falter. "If you come for her, you come for me, and I don't lose, Langston." For a moment, Victor's confidence wavered, his eyes darting between us. But he quickly recovered, his smile returning as he raised his glass in a mock toast. "We'll see," he said, his voice a dark promise. And then he turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving a chill in his wake. I exhaled, my body trembling, and Nathan pulled me closer, his arm wrapping around my waist. "You were incredible," he said, his voice soft, his eyes shining with something I hadn't seen before: pride. I've never seen anyone stand up to him like that. I looked up at him, my heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something I was only beginning to understand. In that moment, I realized that my fight wasn't just about saving Harper Textiles. It was about protecting the family I had left, the family I was building with Nathan and Ethan. Victor could try to tear us down, but I wouldn't let him win. Not this time. As the piano played on, its melody a haunting backdrop to the glittering room, I felt a fire ignite within me, a determination to face the past and fight for the future, no matter the cost. The days after the gala were a whirlwind of determination and quiet moments that stitched Nathan, Ethan, and me into something resembling a family. Victor's threats hung over us like a dark cloud, but I refused to let them define our future. I had faced him once, and I would do it again. Not just for Harper Textiles, but for the people I loved. Nathan and I worked tirelessly to secure the company's future, reaching out to new investors and restructuring the business to support charitable initiatives for children in need. It was a vision my father would have been proud of, a way to honor his legacy while giving back to the community he had always cared about. But more than that, it was a way to heal the wounds of my past, to prove to myself that I could be the daughter he deserved. I spent my mornings with Ethan, who had moved into Nathan's penthouse with Margaret's blessing. The boy was a quiet storm, his gray eyes, so much like Nathan's, holding a depth of emotion that belied his 10 years. One sunny morning, I found him sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by crayons and paper, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What are you drawing?" I asked, kneeling beside him, the hardwood cool against my knees. He held up a picture of a family. 3 stick figures standing under a bright yellow sun, their hands linked. "This is me," he said, pointing to the smallest figure. "And this is Dad, and this is you." My heart swelled, a lump forming in my throat as I traced the lines of the drawing with my finger. "It's beautiful, Ethan," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Can I draw with you?" He nodded, handing me a blue crayon, and we spent the next hour creating a world of color together. Trees, a dog, a house with a red roof. I taught him how to shade the leaves, a trick my father had shown me when I was his age, and as Ethan laughed at my clumsy attempt to draw a puppy, I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years. I saw my father in that moment, his gentle smile, the way he'd sit with me for hours, sketching designs for new fabrics. "You're good at this," Ethan said, his voice shy, and I smiled, blinking back tears. "My dad taught me," I said, softly. "He would have loved to meet you." In that quiet, sunlit room, I felt my father's presence, a silent approval that gave me the strength to keep going. But Victor wasn't done with us. Just as we began to find our footing, he struck, again, this time with a vicious article that accused Nathan of financial fraud, claiming he had siphoned funds from Sterling Tech to prop up Harper Textiles. The allegations were baseless, but they were enough to send shockwaves through Nathan's board of directors, threatening to unravel everything we had worked for. I watched Nathan pace the living room that evening, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice tight with frustration as he spoke to his lawyers. "We'll fight this," he said, hanging up and turning to me, his eyes stormy with determination. But I saw the toll it was taking on him. The sleepless nights, the weight of his company's future on his shoulders. And I knew I couldn't let him bear this alone. I made a decision that night, one that would either save us or break me. The next morning I called a press conference, arranging it in the lobby of Sterling Tech, a sleek space with marble floors and glass walls that reflected the city skyline. I stood at the podium, the cameras flashing like a swarm of fireflies, their lights blinding as I gripped the edges of the stand, my heart pounding in my chest. Nathan stood off to the side, his expression unreadable, but I could feel his eyes on me, a steady presence that gave me courage. The reporters murmured among themselves, their questions poised like arrows, waiting to strike. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling but resolute as I began to speak. 15 years ago, I ran from my family, I said, the words spilling out like a confession. I left my father and my sister because I couldn't face the pain of my mother's death, and I've carried that shame every day since. I came back to save Harper Textiles, to honor my father's legacy, but I brought this storm upon us. The accusations against Nathan Sterling are false. He has done nothing but support me, even when I didn't deserve it. If you want to blame someone, blame me. I'm the one who failed, but I'm here now, trying to make things right. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air, and I felt the tears spill down my cheeks, hot and unbidden. I had laid myself bare, exposed my deepest regrets to the world, but I didn't care. This wasn't about saving my reputation. It was about saving Nathan, about protecting the family we were building, about proving that I could be more than the woman who ran. I stepped back from the podium, my legs trembling, and before I could retreat, Nathan was there, his presence a wall of strength at my side. He took my hand, his fingers warm and steady, and stepped up to the microphone, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Evelyn Harper is the strongest woman I've ever known," he said, his tone fierce, his gray eyes blazing with pride. "She's not a fraud, and neither am I. We'll fight these lies, and we'll do it together." The cameras flashed again, capturing the moment, but I barely noticed. I looked at Nathan, my vision blurred with tears, and saw the man I loved. Not the cold billionaire I had met in that sterile office, but a man who had chosen to stand by me, to fight for me, even when I had given him every reason to walk away. We left the press conference hand in hand, the weight of the world still on our shoulders, but lighter now, shared between us. As we stepped into the elevator, the doors closing behind us, Nathan pulled me into his arms, his lips brushing my forehead in a tender gesture that made my heart ache. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice soft, but I shook my head, my hands gripping his jacket. "Yes, I did," I whispered. "For you, for Ethan, for my father, I had to." In that moment, I knew we had turned a corner, that we had faced the darkness together and come out stronger. Victor could throw whatever he wanted at us, but we would not break. Not now. Not ever. The storm that had threatened to tear us apart finally broke, leaving behind a quiet that felt both fragile and sacred. In the weeks following the press conference, the truth came to light. Victor's accusations against Nathan were proven false, a desperate attempt to undermine us that crumbled under the scrutiny of Sterling Tech's legal team. The board stood by Nathan, their faith in him unshaken, and Harper Textiles began to thrive under our new vision, its profits funding programs for children in need, a legacy my father would have cherished. The media frenzy died down, the headlines shifting to other scandals, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But more than that, I felt like I had found a home, not just in the penthouse Nathan and I shared, but in the family we had built with Ethan, a family forged through pain and redemption. We decided to hold a small ceremony to renew our vows, not for the cameras or the world, but for us, for the love that had grown in the cracks of our broken pasts. The penthouse was transformed for the occasion, its sleek modernity softened by the glow of dozens of candles, their flickering light casting warm shadows on the walls. White lilies adorned the space, their sweet scent mingling with the crisp night air that drifted in through the open balcony doors. The city skyline stretched out before us, a glittering tapestry of lights under a crescent moon, and the distant hum of traffic was a gentle lullaby, a reminder of the world we had faced and overcome together. I stood in front of a full-length mirror in the bedroom, smoothing the simple ivory dress I had chosen for the night. It was nothing like the extravagant gown I had worn for our first wedding. No lace, no train, just a soft silk that hugged my frame and made me feel like myself. My dark hair fell in loose waves over my shoulders, and as I adjusted the delicate gold necklace my mother had given me years ago, I felt her presence, a quiet blessing on this new beginning. Nathan stepped into the room, his reflection appearing behind mine, and I turned to face him, my breath catching at the sight of him. He wore a tailored black suit, but his tie was loose, his collar unbuttoned, and there was a softness in his gray eyes that I had come to love. A softness that had been hidden beneath layers of control when we first met. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice low and warm, and I smiled, my cheeks flushing under his gaze. "So do you," I replied, stepping closer to him, my fingers brushing against the lapel of his jacket. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my skin, and for a moment, we stood there in silence, the weight of our journey settling around us like a comforting blanket. "Are you ready?" he asked, and I nodded, my heart full. This time, I wasn't walking into a lie. I was walking into a promise, one I intended to keep. The ceremony was intimate, just the three of us, Nathan, Ethan, and me, with Margaret and her daughter as our only witnesses. We stood on the balcony, the moon casting a silver glow over us, the candles flickering in the gentle breeze. Ethan stood between us, his small hand in mine, his dark hair tousled as he looked up at us with a shy smile. The officiant, a kind woman with a warm voice, spoke words of love and commitment, but I barely heard them, my focus on the man in front of me. When it was time for the rings, Nathan slid a simple gold band onto my finger, his touch steady and sure. And I did the same for him, my hands trembling with the weight of the moment. "I love you, Evelyn," he said, his voice a vow in itself, and I felt tears prick my eyes as I whispered, "I love you too." Ethan tugged at my dress, his voice small but clear, "Will you be my mom now?" he asked, his gray eyes wide with hope, and my heart shattered and mended all at once. I knelt down, pulling him into my arms, his small body warm against mine. "Forever," I said, my voice breaking as I kissed his forehead, tears streaming down my cheeks. He hugged me tightly, his arms wrapping around my neck, and I felt Nathan's hand on my shoulder, a silent promise that we were in this together. After the ceremony, we moved to the living room, where Margaret had set up a small table with a cake she had baked herself, its vanilla frosting decorated with tiny edible flowers. Ethan laughed as he smeared frosting on his nose, and Nathan wiped it off with a napkin, his smile brighter than I had ever seen. We sat together on the couch, the city lights twinkling outside, and I leaned into Nathan, his arm around my shoulders, Ethan curled up between us. Margaret snapped a photo, her laughter filling the room, and I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible, a peace born from the ashes of our past mistakes. Later, when Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch, his head resting on my lap, Nathan and I stepped out onto the balcony, the night air cool against my skin. The moon hung low in the sky, its light reflecting off the glass buildings around us, and the city hummed below, a symphony of life that felt both distant and comforting. Nathan pulled me close, his hands on my waist, his breath warm against my hair. "Thank you for staying," he said, his voice soft, and I turned in his arms, looking up at him with a smile. "Thank you for not letting me go," I replied, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw. As we stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, I thought of my father, of the legacy he had left behind, and I knew he would be proud, not just of the company we had saved, but of the family we had built. I thought of Ethan, sleeping peacefully inside, and I wondered how many more children we could help, how many more lives we could touch with the work we were doing. Our journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, new storms to weather, but for the first time I wasn't afraid. With Nathan by my side, with Ethan in our lives, I knew we could face anything. Under the moonlight, I felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by a late-blooming happiness that was worth every tear, every fight, every moment of doubt. If this journey of love, redemption, and family touched your heart, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It means the world to us. And if you want to join more stories that inspire and uplift, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Let's keep exploring the beauty of second chances together.